Howdy, folks. TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. We're here. We may have Kevin Allen a little later on in the show to discuss some things at the GM's meetings down in Florida. I'll start with the pre-show, and let me start with the silly stuff before we get into some somber stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, it broke. I woke up this morning at 5:30 in the morning with about 15 Twitter flags on my phone. My phone had blown up because there was all this talk. Broke around 12:30 last night that the Bills were on the verge of trading for Antonio Brown, the wide receiver from Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out, as I basically searched Antonio Brown online, that a couple hours later, Adam Schefter came out and said that basically the talks were dead. And it came out a little later on, and this hasn't been confirmed, but you can get the general gist here that Pittsburgh wanted to trade him to Buffalo. Buffalo was interested in acquiring him. Antonio Brown said, "Hell no, I'm not going to Buffalo," and said, "I'm not renegotiating my contract or anything, and I won't show up." So, okay.
Such a good guy.
And this is the thing. It's like, and everybody's, in Buffalo, everybody's got the inferiority complex. Well, the Bills haven't thrown. There's one radio host on the big radio station in Buffalo that is like, oh, the Bills should expect this. They've sucked. Their offensive has been terrible for 20 years. So what do you expect? Antonio Brown did the Bills a favor. He is a team killer. Yeah. I am so glad that jerk did not say, "Oh, sure, I'll go wherever I can be paid," because this was Terrell Owens times 6. Yeah. This was they signed Terrell Owens at the end of his career, basically to make a splash because he was a big name. Antonio Brown thinks he's the best wide receiver in the league. He may very well be, but he's a jerk. And and Pittsburgh couldn't get rid of him any quicker based on the turmoil that he generated with that team. So honestly, I am not displeased at all. And thankfully Buffalo is a small town that a lot of people don't want to go to. In this instance, they'll go and sign free agents, maybe have to pay a few more dollars. This is similar to Chris Pronger in Edmonton. He went there for a little while and then said, "I got to get out of here."
Yeah.
But Chris Pronger wasn't an a-hole, and I think Antonio Brown is one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Chris Pronger could be an a-hole with reporters, but he did that on purpose. He liked the back and forth. Right. So, and that's what I learned when he was a Flyer, and that was fine. I thought that was it was a pretty good act at times, actually. So anyhow, let's talk about Tom Seaver. It was announced yesterday that he has dementia. A few years back, he got Lyme disease, and I don't know if there's a connection. I have no idea. I'm not a doctor. But he got that because he has a vineyard, but he's not one of these sports athletes that just puts his name on a label. He actually is out in the vineyard every day working the grapes, because that's how Tom Seaver is. Like, he's not going to put his name to if you noticed over the years, he doesn't just put his name to anything.
So what you're saying, Russ, is this is not Wayne Gretzky Estates? Continue.
I once wrote about that in the Hockey News. Anyhow, that's a different story. Anyhow, what's interesting about Seaver is, that he actually became a lottery pick because he went to like Fresno College. It was like a junior college. Then he transferred to USC.
Right.
And in between there, he played for a semi-pro Alaskan team. When that happened, he became ineligible. He signed a contract with the Braves, but then that was null and void, and then it was like a lottery. And so the teams in the lottery were the Cleveland Indians, the Phillies, and the Mets. And the Mets won the lottery. I could have been a Phillies fan, though, if Seaver had been won the lottery with the Phillies. And that's an interesting thing, because I definitely liked the player. Now, I don't know if I would have known about Tom Seaver, though, if he wasn't a Met. That's the only thing, because obviously living on Long Island, I knew about him right away. Probably by the age of 5, believe it or not. Like, that's my family is huge into baseball. My grandfather used to take me to doubleheaders at a very young age at Shea Stadium. So Seaver, it became like, a mild obsession with me when I was a I was a pitcher in Little League, and my mom called me Young Tom Seaver until I started beaning guys, and then I wasn't Young Tom Seaver anymore. I was more.
Then they were young Ryan Duran.
Yeah, I was more like Ryan Duran, who, by the way, I did interview him once. Nice guy. And so it grew from there. Somebody said, hey, do you have any of Seaver's cards? Well, I have all of his major playing cards from his playing days. Obviously, he's been retired forever, and guys still got cards made. So I couldn't keep up with the flow on that.
You have a rookie? Do you have a rookie?
I have a rookie. I have his 67 rookie card. I even have this card that, and I forget the name of the artist, great guy, made for me. This is like a one-on-one. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But it's just, so one day I walked into a local card shop before he went into the Hall of Fame and wanted to sort of fill in my Seaver collection. So I said, give me everything you have, Tom Seaver, and then I'll decide if I have the card or not. If not, I'm buying it. And that was in the 90s, before 92 when he was inducted into the Hall. So I bought about $100 worth of cards that day and filled in the rest of the collection. But I have so many things. And he's just, I've met him in person. It goes to all of that. But, he was in the armed forces. He was really influential in baseball, obviously. He was super successful outside of baseball. Like, there's a lot to look at him about and just say it's a great American story, and that's, makes it really hard.
Yeah, and it seems to me like, and I know that they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the '69 team.
Yeah, and that's my favorite team. I've always come out and said that. It's no slight to the '86 guys.
Yeah, and I get that. It's a very lovable underdog story. But it's the 50th anniversary, and now there's talk, and it seems like now, and tell me if I'm wrong, it seems like now the Mets organization is doing catch up because now there's talk of a Seaver monument.
Yeah, well,
statue.
So the short story on that is before the Citi Field opened, I was at like the National Collectors Convention, and I ran into a guy who does all the iron work for all the major league ballparks, has made all the statues. And I asked him, hey, what do the Mets have going there? And he goes, nothing. And I'm like, not even a Tom Seaver statue? He goes, no, I brought up Seaver. I brought up other names. They had no interest in any of them. So I couldn't believe that. And so there was a game before the Met game, believe it or not, that opened up Citi Field. It was a college game. Mm-hmm. And so we bought tickets for that just to go in there and sort of inspect the place. We probably left by the third inning. And I think it was Fordham playing there, actually. And there was nothing. And actually, there was very little signage either. Like now there's a Tom Seaver entrance. That didn't exist even in '09. So this is something that has been a problem from the very beginning. And I'm really kind of mad that some of the members of the media now are just latching onto this now that Tom is sick.
Yeah.
It's like, listen, this should have been in the plans before the ballpark ever opened. And I was mad. I wrote about it, and that's all I could say.
Well, I remember like when Citi Field opened, then we'll start talking about hockey, folks. Yeah. I remember when Citi Field opened, there was a lot of talk about the Wilpons being Brooklyn Dodgers fans and how the stadium sort of in certain areas resembled Ebbets Field and had more of an Ebbets Field feel to it and homage to it than it did the history of the Mets at Shea, which is, that's like building Yankee Stadium and celebrating the Polo Grounds.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right. And actually, the Shea Bridge, my wife got mad at when we crossed it inside because she's from Queens. It would cross into Brooklyn. And if you're from Queens, you don't really like anybody from Brooklyn. So it was another thing where she felt like that's got it wrong, And they really added a lot of stuff after the fact. These entrances, a lot of the pictures. It all started to come in over the years and fill in, except for like a monument or a statue. Now, there is the Jackie Robinson Rotunda, and that's something that did rub a lot of Met fans the wrong way, and me a little bit too. I have all the respect for Jackie Robinson. I mean, my mom used to go to Brooklyn Dodger games and saw him play. She's that old. But that doesn't mean he had a lot to do with the Mets. And so I think the public pressure is going to force the Wilpons into doing this. But I think it's a shame that it came to this.
That they had to be dragged kicking and screaming, or at least being perceived as being dragged kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
All right. Let's
9 years later, right? I mean, you can't say it was in the plans.
Yeah. All right. Exactly.
10 years now.
Yeah. Okay, let's start the show. I'll save my my spot removing story
until for tomorrow. It's timeless, right?
Well, Monday, because unless we're doing a Saturday webcast. Hey, Kev, we're live, and we're just finishing up the pre-show. So,
all right, good time.
Your timing is absolutely perfect.
Yep, you're right on.
Did you talk about Tom Seaver in the pre-show?
But if you want to,
you want to give some thoughts, go.
No, I'm just saddened by all this. And obviously we're a hockey show, and most people, we tend to talk about hockey heroes, but Tom Seaver to me was so remarkable because he was not only just an incredibly dominant performer, in my opinion, with just the nastiest slider, but was just an incredible human being. Two things strike me. Number one, about the sadness in the baseball world over this, and number two, how we've all sort of now see dementia almost, you're passing along condolences because, we now understand it, and most of us have gone through it in one way, shape, or form with someone close to us. And, it's almost like people are grieving today because they've lost.
I was near tears yesterday, Kev, because that was my favorite player. The quick story I could tell you, Kev, that you might find interesting, and maybe the audience will, maybe not. Did you ever hear of a player named Vern Fuller, played for the Indians?
I know the name. I've heard the name.
So there was a time, and if people go and find my book, I have a Mets book out there, Numbers Don't Lie, but he gave me a story when Tom Seaver was actually a roommate of his. And I'm not going to give it all away because it's in the book, but he was a roommate. It was a one-time thing, and it was only for a couple days. And Tom stayed in touch with him all those years later. He even met up with him once, gave him like a fruit tray at a hotel. Like these are the things that don't really get talked about with Seaver because he was such a dominant performer, and he did have a bulldog mentality. Mm-hmm. The other favorite thing about Seaver that Kevin just sort of brought up was there were guys sort of laughing and joking around in the locker room when he was like a rookie or a second-year player. And he was like, listen, this isn't the Casey Stengel era anymore. If you're not here to win, leave. That's how serious he was for winning.
Russ, the trade was 77, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're bringing that up. You're really now.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is because I really started watching baseball when I was around 9 or 10 years old, around 77. So my conscious memory of Seaver was with starting with the Reds, and then later on he went to the White Sox. Yeah. I think he was with the Red Sox in '86, but he wasn't on their active roster.
He had a knee injury.
Yeah. So, but I remember him there, and then I remember him winning his 300th game. I think it was at Yankee Stadium.
He was on Phil Rizzuto Day, and I was there. Yeah, it was great.
And it's funny because I remember him with the Reds, and he was still a great pitcher, but he wasn't the dominant force that he was with the Mets.
Right.
And I remember him after his career doing color with Phil Rizzuto and on Yankee broadcast. And like I said to you before, they loved each other. They were
great. Their
chemistry was so great on the air. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I used to watch those games. The chemistry was fun. Now that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, if you're younger and you don't really have knowledge of what kind of pitcher Seaver was, but you're not too young, the guy the pitcher that he reminded me of, or actually he reminded me of Seaver, was Jack Morris. Jack Morris had that bulldog mentality, going after the hitters, the sharp breaking pitch, the kind of the filthiness of a pitch that often seemed unhittable, and that's the way Seaver was. But their personalities were exact opposites. Jack Morris was a guy that was very difficult to get along.
Yeah. I think the determination was the same. I actually think he was. And I'm not going to say he was Maddox in terms of his accuracy, but his career statistics are a lot better than Morris. So I think top end, he was maybe top 2 or 3 pitchers in baseball. Morris, for a smaller window, I think for a couple of years.
I meant the comparison, not so much with
what you meant in the overall frame of
I agree with that.
Their approach to pitching.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's true. And you're right, Mike. As far as power pitchers go, he didn't walk that many. So he's among the best for that. There's no doubt.
Okay, let's get started here. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, March 8th, 2019.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen from USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. We'll start with some of the games last night. And, Kev, I know that you wrote a piece on the Columbus Blue Jackets, so let's start with that game, the 3-0 Pittsburgh Penguin victory over the Blue Jackets in Pittsburgh. Strangely enough, it was announced before the game that Sergei Bobrovsky was not even going to be one of the two goalies in the lineup. He wasn't the backup. He was up in the press box. There was some indication this morning that maybe he tweaked something in the last game against New Jersey, but they started Joonas Korpisalo, and he didn't play badly, but after the game, after they lose 3-0, that was something that John Tortorella was questioned about. Right now, there has to be concern going on in Columbus because, I mean, they're only 2 points out, but they're chasing 3 teams, and I believe they've only scored 10 goals in the 6 games since the trade deadline. Things are not settling in right now with all the guys that they've added.
I would agree with that assessment. And just so for people who didn't see my column, what I wrote about yesterday, and I did want to talk about today because I thought the reaction to my column was not what I thought it was going to be. And, the idea of the column is that we've reached a point now in the sports landscape where, and it speaks really to the level of sophistication in sports fans today, that winning today now gives way to fans, wanting and desiring, more hope for the future. We saw that in Buffalo with the glee that they had in chasing Connor McDavid. Obviously, the Maple Leafs went through that as well, although I think that circumstance is different because they had all the pieces, and I think it was the right time for doing all that. This season, for example, as soon as the Kings got off to a bad start and the Blackhawks did, their fan bases were all in the lose for you mode. And I just think it's sad. I think there's room for both, obviously, aggressive behavior and for a time when you need to rebuild, because I think the rebuild in Toronto. But I was amazed at how many people who said, no, I get just as much enjoyment out of sort of watching my team sort of plan for the future to get an extended run, and I get more pleasure out of that than getting into playoffs. And to me, that's remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
And you know what I think in part the reason for that is I think it's the advent of fantasy sports and the fact that people are their own general managers of their own teams that they create. So now I think they see that, well, okay, this is what you have to do to build your own club. And maybe because of that, they say, okay, I can buy in that my club needs to rebuild and do the same things that I have done in fantasy baseball or fantasy football or fantasy hockey. I think they associate that instead of just going all out and saying they got to win, they got to win, they got to win. And I said to Russ before we went live, the only thing that I disputed, I mean, a lot of people are saying regarding Jarmo Kekalainen that, he was brave to go out and it was a great thing to go for it. Like the Blue Jackets have, keeping their own free agents and going out and getting Duchesne and Dzingel and McQuaid and a couple other pieces. And my questioning of it is this team was not, I would say, a serious, strong contender for the Stanley Cup when they decided to make these moves. If they didn't want to trade Panarin or Bobrovsky, keep them and see where they go. That's fine. But they weren't Tampa. They weren't Washington. They weren't Boston. And you could understand why those teams would trade a bunch of draft picks and sell out to go all in. This team is borderline to make the playoffs. And if they miss, I think missing is a disaster for them.
So I think I get both of your arguments. I think they are in it and were strong enough because the Metro, for the wild card stuff especially, was definitely up in the air. I think Pittsburgh is maybe, everybody made fun of me yesterday when I said Pittsburgh is a lock for the playoffs, but they're a lock for the playoffs. Trust me when I say that. But there was still always going to be a spot open at least. And so I feel like they had to go with it for their fan base for all the reasons we've mentioned before. So I get what Kevin's saying too. The thing about it is back in the day, like if we go back to like the Mike Ditka trading for Ricky Williams, nobody talked about asset management then when he traded all his picks and they folded up the briefcase and left the draft. They talked about it after when the Cowboys built the championship team off of that. And that maybe was the start of it. Well, wasn't it the Cowboys that they traded?
That was the Herschel Walker deal.
Oh, that was the Herschel Walker deal. I'm sorry. Well, whoever they traded him to, a lot of those picks worked out too. I think, nobody would ever dare do that now. Mm-hmm. But I think because now with the cap and they see that teams like Pittsburgh has built with their youngsters and even, Carolina when you go back with Cam Ward and everything else that they want to draft like their superstar, their Patrick Kane, like from the Blackhawks. So now that's where a lot of that lies. I get both, but look, Columbus is still in it. Actually, if you ask me, I think John Tortorella is coaching his way out of it. I don't know why Bobrovsky didn't play yesterday. Nobody knows why, and that's a little weird. And then the other thing that was weird was he said a couple of days ago that McQuaid was too slow, and then he put him back in the lineup. So I really don't understand what Torts is doing right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's obviously playing with McQuaid's head, and he thinks he's probably trying to motivate him. But I think Columbus needed to do it just because of their history, 4 times in the playoffs. And what I noted in my column, and I think this is important because I do agree with Russ that you got to actually, if I was the owner of a team and I hired a general manager, I want to know how comfortable he felt with multiple balls in the air, because the new mandate in the NHL is you've got to be aggressive enough to compete for the playoffs now, but you somehow have to keep your eye on the future as well. Like, you can't be a building general manager. And I think that's what Ron Hextall got in trouble with. I think they really liked what he was doing in terms of they have a nice collection of younger players, but, he didn't correct the flaws of the team in the offseason. They didn't have a goaltender because they, if Hextall was right and Carter Hart wasn't ready at the start of the season, well, why didn't he correct that, coming into the season? And I think that was the issue with Columbus is, they just needed to do something for the fan base, which I think is getting a little weary of the fact. But the point I made in my column is, unlike in other leagues, particularly the NBA, because I think baseball and NFL are in their own situation, but in the NBA, when just getting into the playoffs isn't good enough. Like, you don't have that great of a chance if you're the lower seeded team, but in the NHL you do. And the statistic that I showed yesterday is since 1987, that's a long time ago, the lower seed has won almost 38% of the time. Now, that's a fairly good percentage. And gives you a lot of optimism that if you get in the playoffs, that who knows, you might be able to make some inroads. Sure. And so I think that it was worth it for them, especially if they really believe. And I thought, I'm not buying this whole, we're not all in, where we just liked our prospects and thought, well, we got plenty of prospects, we don't need these picks. I don't actually buy that, but saying that. But if you believe that, I thought this was a fine time to go ahead and go for it. And I'm actually surprised, though, that they haven't, gelled, because, they're 4-4 now since they started making the trades. Right. And you would think they would have been better than that. I mean, would they have been better than that without making the trades? I would say they might have been exactly the same.
They might have been exactly the same. That's the weird part.
We had the echo there for a second. Okay. Go say that again, Russ.
Yeah, they might have been exactly the same. And we knew it takes a little time to work these guys in, but unfortunately, like when I said that, Mike had the retort that, well, there's not a lot of time left, and that's true too. It's the hardest thing to get going, I would say, is just for the lack of a better term. And right now, Torts has not been able to get it going. And I watched the games, and the guys aren't playing badly. Duchesne looks good, but they're not finding chemistry with their new guys. And that's the biggest problem. And nobody knows how to build chemistry on the fly. Like, that's something that it's impossible to figure out. It just either happens or it doesn't.
which is one of the reasons why I thought Torts, and he's going to put his lines together where he thinks is best. But when you have two guys like Duchesne and Dzingel coming in, even though they may not have played together in Ottawa, you've got one on one line and one on the other line. And why don't you put both of them together? Because at least they know each other. At least they maybe have practiced together. I mean, there's more of a connection there chemistry wise than there is with, putting them on separate lines and changing things on two different lines on your team. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. Now, the game that I watched, Kev, and I'm baffled by how the Boston Bruins, how well they're playing. And the thing is that they're doing this. They've now earned points in 18 straight games, going back to a regulation loss against the Rangers on January 19th. It's been 18 games in a row. They've earned at least a point. They were down 3-2 in the third period to Florida. They score a tying goal in the final minute of regulation, and then Patrice Bergeron scores with 7 seconds, and they win 4-3 over Florida. I focus on the Bruins because they're the likely first-round match with the Leafs, and I mean, some people are saying the glass is half full. People in Toronto are saying, well, they're peaking too early. This team's done this for a quarter of a season. I don't think you can say they're peaking too early. They're doing this without their best scorer. And imagine what it's going to be like when they get him back.
Well, for sure. And, plus that, the idea of peaking too soon and too early, or, that you're not playing well enough at the end. It never works out that way. I mean, I've covered the league long enough to know I've seen teams do exactly the opposite. I've seen the team that was playing very poorly at the end do well in the playoffs, and I've seen a team that was doing very well, bow out in the first round. So you never know. But saying all that, I think the thing that strikes me about the Boston Bruins is nobody's paying attention, but they have just as much chance of winning a Stanley Cup as really any team in the league. Like, they have all the elements. They've got a offense capable of scoring enough goals. They've got a defensive crew that has some talent and has an ability to keep the puck, and they have a goalie who has some history of being able to do that. And I still believe, and this is an odd statement, but I think Bergeron is still underrated. Like, I mean, people now know that he's an exceptional player, but I don't think they see him in the same vein as John Tavares or a Steven Stamkos or the top centers in the game, and he's right there with them.
No, I agree with you, Kev. For the last week, I've been saying I think he's the second best player in hockey right now.
I was going to say, to lead you into this, Russ. In Toronto, they believe he's that good because he's been the devil to them the last 2 times they've made in the playoffs. I mean, he has killed them, not single-handedly, but he can shut down a number 1 center. He can score goals on the power play. He can take faceoffs. He can penalty kill. He can play 20-plus minutes a night. And I think he's 33 years old, and he's not slowed down a bit.
No, he's tremendous. And he doesn't have to score 100 points, Kev, because he makes everybody else better. And he puts points on the board. And he takes points off almost with his defense.
Yeah. Well, and he has 25 goals. Like, it's not like he's not scoring either. I mean, he's a remarkable player, and he's a tremendous leader, and he's got it all going for him. And it's funny. At the start of the season, I was looking more at the West. I was curious to see. I really like Tampa, but I thought Nashville was going to be good, and Winnipeg, and wanted to see where Vegas was going to be. But now you look at the East, and you're going like, wow, this could be quite a playoff. You got Tampa Bay that's been tremendous all year. Boston has been incredible. Nobody's paid attention to it. Washington is still Washington. They added the key parts at the end there. I think they're going to be good in the playoffs. The Penguins still have Crosby and Malkin. They've got the pedigree. They know what they're doing. And you got Barry Trotz on Long Island as kind of the dark horse sleeper. I mean, the playoffs in the East. Notice I didn't even mention the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I know, and there is a reason why, Kev. And
I mean, and they were a team that I think at the start of the year everybody thought, boy, they're going to be right there.
So,
well,
they definitely won the Stanley Cup in November, but after that, you know.
Oh no, they won the Stanley Cup on July 2nd. They were the odds-on favorite, but you have to play the games. And honestly, those who cover the team and those who know the team well knew that, in spite of the fact that John Tavares was a fantastic signing, that unless they addressed their Achilles heel, they would not go anywhere. And I want to shift to the GM meetings, Kev, because again, when we talked about it on the show this week, the NHL showed no appetite at all, like you've mentioned in the past, to change the playoff format. And if it doesn't get changed and it remains the way it is right now, Boston's not getting any weaker. They got young players. They're going to be good for a while. Tampa Bay may have to lose a player or two after this year because of cap situations, but they're still going to be great. Montreal has still got Carey Price. I mean, it's not going to be a cakewalk in the Atlantic Division, and the Leafs may get a little worse next year because they're probably going to lose Jake Gardiner, and they're probably going to maybe have to trade one of their forwards because of the cap space issue. Just having the offense that they have is not a guarantee of winning anything. You have to be able to play defense too, and you can't rely on your goaltender to stop 40+ shots every night.
No, and with regard to the playoff format, I mean, the one thing about the NHL is that they've always been resistant to change, and more so, in my lifetime, I would say the NHL has done less to change the game than all the other sports. If you look at my lifetime, I've seen the introduction of the 3-point shot in basketball, the introduction of the designated hitter, and the lowering of the mound in baseball. We've seen interleague play come into baseball. In the football, it went from the most violent game on the planet to flag football for the quarterback now. Right. Not being able to touch the wide receivers once they're beyond the line of scrimmage. They've done a lot to change that. They've moved the goalpost back. They've fooled with the kickoffs. They've done a lot. But in hockey, we're essentially still playing the same game. I mean, we've certainly tweaked it, and we've had instant replay. And I think that mentality remains today. And, I find it interesting that when I did the story where the USA Today just proposed the rule changes that we think fans would like. One of them was going to, 1 through 16 seeding for both the NBA and the NHL, which the NBA has, discussed and actually readily admits that it could be, kind of fan friendly. The NHL is really not interested in that. And the number one reason, obviously, is the travel. They don't want to see that Tampa Bay, Vancouver first round matchup. And the other reason is television as well, because I think TV is accustomed to, liking to have in the early rounds or even later rounds a 7:00 game and a 10:00 game. But they just don't want to go there. They don't want to disrupt it. It seems to be working well for them, and they don't want to fool around with it. But and what they often say too is that it's disruptive to the competition, that players don't get the proper rest and all that. But I think that's more of a cop-out. I think the modern athlete now, especially with the way travel is conducted on charter aircraft and staying in luxury hotels and so forth, I just don't think it's the wear and tear that it used to be.
Yeah, nobody's traveling on like a 15-hour train ride. I mean, it's right.
Well, but it's funny. You were laughing at it, but the funny thing was, and I remember, I think it was 78 or 79 that they had the 1 through 16 set up, and it may have been early 80s, but I remember Buffalo playing Vancouver in the first round of the playoffs, and it was a best of 3 or best of 5, and the games it was like Thursday in Buffalo, Friday in Vancouver, Sunday in Buffalo. It was like 3 games in 4 nights flying cross country. Now, I'm not advocating that. That's just asinine.
No, but it's interesting. I interviewed some GMs about it. I talked to John Chaika about it from the Arizona Coyotes, and his quote kind of struck me. He goes, "Well, only thing I can tell you for sure is no matter what we put in, and not everybody will like it." And that's the truth about this. I mean, we've had 1 to 16 before, and I remember everybody complaining about it then, And
there's always going to be complaints. I think that's fair.
The teams in the East love the bus league. They liked it, that that it's if it works out well, Washington plays Pittsburgh,
Right.
and while the fans may not like it and everything, it's the travel is simple and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I have one good travel story. Before he passed, I had interviewed Edgar Laprade, and he was the Calder Award winner for 1946. And he used to love playing cards in the back of the train. Like, that was a big thing. A lot of those teams did. Now we have charter flights, and guys could literally just gamble on their phones if they want. Or they, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a completely different world.
They do play cards on planes, though. They do.
Yeah, they do play cards, and they play for pretty big money now. So
yeah, now they play for a lot bigger money.
No, I mean, now what my perfect plan, and of course you're right. If they implemented what I want, there's some people will have problems with it. I think if they went to a 1 through 8 conference format with the top two the division winners being the top 2 seeds, and then basically 3 through 8 would be in the amount, whoever has the most points down to the 8th place team, you still have the possibility of having divisional matchups in that scenario. You could have Toronto, Montreal in a 1 through 8 format. So it preserves a little of what they want, but it also provides, it's a little bit more of a meritocracy where a team like Toronto, who's going to have 105 points, isn't playing a team that has 110 points. I mean, and I'm not saying that it's unfair for, Winnipeg and Nashville to face each other in the second round of the playoffs. I mean, those teams should have a benefit for doing so well during the regular season and not a 1 and out, which right now it's starting to look like Toronto is going to be a 1 and out because they can't beat the Bruins.
Well, for sure. I mean, a seeding setup, we say all the time, at least the league says that they want to make the regular season meaningful. Well, it does. When that's a much greater advantage if you did 1 to 16 or even 1 to 8. But I want to make 2 points about that.
Sure.
Number one, I think the best proposal I've heard and the simplest that would probably make everyone happy, because everyone I've brought it up to says, yeah, this makes way too much sense. And I don't think the league would be opposed to it either, would be once you get to the semifinals, and this is David Poyle's suggestion, you cross over. So one would play 2 in the other, and one would play 2.
Did they do that in the 80s? They did have a crossover before.
Well, the crossover then would allow, obviously, Tampa Bay and Washington to meet in the finals, right, or Nashville and Winnipeg. And
I don't remember, Kev, when I know the league did have a crossover once. I'm trying to remember if we liked it. There was some loopy results, I think, in those years with the playoffs when there was a crossover.
Yeah, but and the second thing I would bring up, if it were left up to me, I still want to see the rat tail in the playoffs. Like I like the idea of a baseball style wild card team. I think that one game would just be the biggest darn game going.
I'd be fine with it.
Yeah, and I think it would be fun. And I don't buy the argument that it makes the regular season meaningless, because you already sort of have that scenario if it comes down to you need to win the final game to get in. It's right. No different. So my attitude is if you don't like that, then don't make sure your team is not in that position. They have to play one game to get in the playoffs.
Right. I'll use baseball as an example. Like the one year the Mets played the game 163 against the Reds, they had to beat the Reds just to get in the playoffs.
I'm convinced as part of when the new CBA is negotiated and you're going to have 32 teams, that you're going to have 7 versus 10 and 8 versus 9 having some sort of play-in game, because it's all it is more revenue. And you're right. I mean, are you telling me that A, the league doesn't want more revenue, B, you could sell that as an individual contract to a TBS or an ESPN and make more money, and you keep more fan bases engaged. So, right.
Let me give you one argument against that.
Okay.
Gary Bettman has said publicly that he does not favor it. And I've covered Gary Bettman many, many, many years. And if you listen to the way he talks, he is very consistent. Mm-hmm. And if he's opposed to it, he is opposed to it. Now, that doesn't mean he won't change his mind, but there's something about it that he doesn't like, and he has said that he's not enamored with that.
He won't be around forever, Kev. So the next guy might vote it in.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Or he's opposed to it, Kevin. But when something is collectively bargained, and there's a chance to like lower escrow and to generate more hockey related revenue, he can be perceived as being dragged kicking and screaming into something he doesn't particularly want, but the owners will want it.
I want to read Mike's column the next day when the Leafs get eliminated in the playing game, just to see if he's consistent with this day, because I'm willing to bet that it might not be that way.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll be blaming Mike Babcock or Kyle Dubas.
Yeah.
For having it.
I just think that game would be so much fun, and I think everyone in the league would enjoy it. And you know what? It wouldn't extend the season that much.
Actually, I think it would get coverage outside of normal hockey. I do. Because
what I would do with it for sure is I would sell it to another network, just like you do in baseball. Like, I don't know, maybe it's the ABC, wild card playoffs.
Oh, the perfect network. You sell it to Bravo TV because it is a reality show at that point. You let them have a little build up to it. You have a little red carpet for it. It'd be massive. There you go.
If that system was in place right now, it would be Carolina versus Philadelphia, 7 through 10, or 7 versus 10, and Montreal versus Columbus in the East. In the West, it would be Dallas versus Colorado and Minnesota versus Arizona. I mean, that's, again, you're keeping those fan bases engaged. But also what you're saying is, you'll be focusing on who's 10th and who's 11th, because that'll be the new line of demarcation. So.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun. And, we're at the point now where, we'll have 32 teams. So half the league misses the playoffs.
Yeah. And we all remember it was 16 out of 21.
Yeah, I mean, we used to joke that anybody with a valid driver's license made the playoffs.
The Leafs had 55 points the one year, and I think they beat Chicago in the first round to get to the second round. And they made the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they were one of the 5 worst teams in the league, or almost. Yeah, they were actually point wise. I think they were 18th in the league because the Norris division was so bad.
So I will, because we have Kev here, I've got to bring up the Minnesota Wild, because I brought them up all year. Preseason, Kev, I picked them to
I know.
To go through and make it to the Cup now. A lot has happened since now and then, but I did love the Donato trade. I fully endorsed it when it happened. He's got 9 points in 8 games. Mm-hmm. Devin Dubnyk did get hot, which I did say if he got hot, maybe they could get past the loss of Dumba and Koivu. Bruce Boudreau is doing a good job. Paul Fenton could be up for GM of the year if they even move up in the standings, because name me another team that loses those kinds of players, Kev, and stays in the race.
Yeah, well,
the Arizona Coyotes.
Yeah, the only thing, I didn't mind the Donato trade. I didn't love it, but I love Donato. I just thought it didn't make any sense to me if you were really trying to get in, as it turned out it did. I just didn't know that Donato would have the impact now. Like I thought eventually he was going to be a top skilled player. But saying all that, I really like Bruce Boudreau as a coach, and to me he's an old school coach. But players like him; they like playing for him, and I know they want to be successful for him. And I just think he's had bad luck in the postseason. I don't really think it's a flaw in his coaching. I just think he's had bad luck.
And if the season ended today, and we can use that statement all the time, but they would play Calgary in the first round. And Kev, I've been watching Calgary recently and watched San Jose a little bit, and the concerns about their goaltending, I think, are justified. And I'm still a little skeptical about Brad Treliving and Doug Wilson maybe not addressing it before the deadline, because Mike Smith cost him a game against Minnesota last weekend. David Rittich was terrible against the Leafs last Monday. Those teams, if you take their defense, if you take their forwards, I think they're Stanley Cup contenders. They're having, they piled up a ton of points. But then I look at Martin Jones and I look at the tandem in Calgary. And if I'm going into a fantasy hockey pool, I'm staying away from Calgary and I'm staying away from San Jose.
Well, the only thing, I think San Jose is in a little bit different situation. Martin Jones has taken a team to the final.
Sure.
We know he can do it. I'm less sure about what's going on in Calgary, but
right.
Jones just, for whatever reason hasn't had the season that was expected of him, but we know he's capable of that.
Right.
And we just don't know what's going on in Calgary. So yeah, I mean, if I was a fan of the Flames, I'd be concerned as well. I mean, they got a nice defense. They've got enough scoring, but goaltending is still what separates you from the good from the bad in this league.
I mean, Russ, Braden Holtby did not have a great year last year, and they started Grubauer in the playoffs, and then Holtby played like Holtby. I mean, it's very possible that Jones does that in San Jose, and when Carlson comes back from his injury, then they could be the team in the West. But honestly, I look at that division, and I'm tempted, again, looking at my things through a sort of a fantasy hockey perspective. I'm preparing myself for my playoff pool. I'm thinking Vegas looks pretty good as an underdog.
Vegas does look good. I'm sticking with the Minnesota Wild. Prove me wrong.
Yeah, I'm not going that trip with
right. Nobody has the guts except me. It's fine.
Yeah, I agree about Vegas. By the way, suddenly that line of Stastny and Pacioretty and Stone just looks like a nice setup, and
could be one of the best lines in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, it could be. And, through 4 games, he hadn't scored yet, he being Stone, but, he was +4, and you could tell the difference.
Since we have you here, one more sec, Mike. I brought up something the other day at the Flyers game, which wasn't very popular in the press box, but I'm going to bring it up here because I was telling Mike, and even I said on the show the other day, I feel like with Tampa, somebody's going to have to invent like the left wing lock again, like the Red Wings did in '97, because clearly the Flyers had a better team on paper, and Detroit drew up a way of sort of neutralizing them. Mike, don't die on the show. I don't know what'll happen then. But don't you think that teams are either going to try and play the trap or play some sort of conservative defensive style to try and keep the score down with Tampa? Because otherwise, they're probably too good.
Well, for sure. I mean, but that just happens, as we all know, automatically in the playoffs. Everybody just plays tighter defensively and more mindful of their defensive responsibilities and, lock it down. So, I mean, I think they'll devise something. They're just not going to let Tampa do whatever they want out there. So I would agree with you. But, it's obviously harder to play that style now than it was, in the days of the New Jersey Devils because of the rules. You can't hold them up. You can't impede. Interference is called more aggressively than it was in the past. So it'll be interesting to see. But there's no way they're going to allow Tampa to get the ice that they've seen thus far in the regular season. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm concerned about regarding Tampa is you basically have nothing to play for the next 6 weeks. The President's Trophy is theirs. Home ice through the Eastern Conference and in the Stanley Cup final is theirs. They really have nothing to play for other than stay healthy and stay engaged. Yeah. And sometimes when you're in that sort of like preventing mode, somebody gets hurt or you lull yourself into a slumber, and then you have to wake up in the first week of April and you could face Pittsburgh. I mean, Pittsburgh would be I think it would be their nightmare, Kev, because if it's Pittsburgh and you've got all that experience and they're sort of surging, having to play desperation hockey to earn a wild card spot, you could catch a slumbering Tampa Bay team, and there you go.
I agree with you. That's the team you'd want to face the least just because of the talent there. I mean, I said before Crosby and Malkin, but there's Letang too, who in my mind has, played like a Norris Trophy candidate this season. But saying that, I think in that East, all those teams are capable of beating Tampa. I don't see them. I mean, I think Tampa is better than those.
They do look different than a lot of these other teams in the regular season. Like when you see them play live, there's a notable difference between Tampa and everybody else so far.
Right. No, I would agree. But you're telling me Washington doesn't know how to beat Tampa? I think they do. So I think Boston could be with them. Now, I like Tampa better than Boston, but that's what we always forget, is that if you play these series, 10 times over a 4-month span, one team would win 6 and the other might win 4 or 7 and 3, but in those 3 times, you could win it. So it's not like they're going to waltz through the Eastern Conference.
No, that's true.
Now, Kev, I want to ask you about this to finish off the show here. Things have quieted down now because after the deadline, the Senators dealt Stone and Duchesne and Dzingel, and now you're sort of looking forward to what's going to happen with that team. I mean, the building situation in Ottawa is chaotic, and now we know that Dorian is going to have a lot of cap space to work with, but you don't know how much that Eugene Melnyk is willing to spend. They could be in a situation like in Arizona where they're taking on salary just to get to the cap floor. I mean, really, what does the NHL think of what's going on in Ottawa right now?
Well, I think they are going to be like that. I think they're going to be the destination for bad contracts. I just think it's just inevitable because you can't get a free agent to go there,
right?
Because it's so messy. But they've got some pluses. Obviously, Kachuk and Shabbat have both played well, and I think they've got some draft picks that they squirreled away. Not the one that they really need, but they have some draft picks. So there's some hope on the horizon, but it's such a mess. But I keep hearing the rumblings about, well, they should just move the team and all that. It's just not going to happen. The league just doesn't want to move franchises. They're going to allow them to have some time to build out of it, but the rebuild there is going to take a while. Like this, it's going to be 3 or 4 years before this team is competitive.
Yeah. I mean, Russ and I have bantered back and forth about the potential of Quebec City and how a Canada to Canada move would probably be the easiest if they decided to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna wait it out to see if they can get the downtown building built. It's just right now it doesn't seem like there's a track to get it done, at least with Melnyk as the owner. And on the ice, I mean, you're right. They have Shabbat and they have Kachuk and they have a number of other young players. But Russ, I don't know how they get any veteran player to come there in a free agent situation. They're going to have to rely on being able to trade for those players to get them to come to Ottawa.
They will trade for him, like a guy like Chris Tierney's doing great there, right? He'll probably get a big fat contract at some point. Like that's what they're going to have to do. I think they could survive like that. I think with their drafting being as good as it has been and all the picks they've acquired, that they could do it that way, and that'll buy them 3 or 4 years, and then maybe by then something will have worked its way out, or the worst thing will happen, and we all know what that is. So.
Yeah, one last thing here. Note from Kevin Kurtz, who covers the San Jose Sharks. Erik Karlsson says he's not going to return anytime soon. We'll be back for the start of the playoffs. So basically, they shut him down with the groin injury, just like the Leafs have shut down Jake Gardiner until just before the playoffs with his back problems, and they're hoping that they can get them back to as close as 100%. I mean that's the thing. It's like I think the Leafs right now are 4 points behind Boston, and now Babcock is talking about sort of taking lifting the foot off the pedal a little bit in terms of playing Freddie Anderson every game. I'll believe it when I see it. He's played him 66 games the last 2 years. I can't see him playing under 60 this year. But okay. Great job, guys. We'll be back on Monday for another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.